New York City, October 1929. The air smells of cigar smoke and gasoline. Taxis slide past the marble facade of the New York Stock Exchange. Brokers laugh too loudly. Fortune feels permanent, solid as the granite towers rising over lower Manhattan. And then, in a matter of hours, that illusion begins to fracture in ways no one yet understands, because by the end of the day, the floor beneath American prosperity will simply vanish. On October 29, 1929, remembered now as Black Tuesday, panic overtakes Wall Street. Orders flood the exchange, telegraph wires jam under the strain. Traders shout until their voices crack. Prices fall faster than messages can travel across the country. Investors try to sell, but there are no buyers left. You couldn't sell your stock even if you wanted to. It is not just money evaporating, it is belief. Inside the offices of the National City Bank of New York, clerks and managers stare at ledgers that no longer make sense. Men who once spoke confidently of margins and dividends now sit with their heads in their hands. Some weep openly, life savings erased between breakfast and dusk. The crash does not unfold gradually, it detonates. Outside, the streets remain deceptively calm. The milk trucks still deliver, the elevated trains still rattle overhead. Yet a psychological rupture has opened. For nearly a decade, Americans had been told that prosperity was permanent, that the Roaring Twenties represented a new economic age. Radios, automobiles, installment plans, progress seemed unstoppable. But now a question spreads quietly from office to office, kitchen to kitchen. If wealth can disappear in a single afternoon, what else might vanish? The newspapers the next morning scream catastrophe. Headlines speak of billions lost. But numbers cannot capture the feeling settling over the country, a tightening in the chest, a quiet shame in the eyes of men who had believed they were building something invincible. Because the crash is not merely financial, it is emotional. It whispers a terrifying possibility. Perhaps we were wrong about ourselves. In apartments across Manhattan and Brooklyn, conversations turn tense. Wives ask careful questions. Husbands offer rehearsed reassurances. It will recover. The market always comes back. Yet beneath those words lies a dawning suspicion that this time may be different. Banks begin to falter, businesses freeze hiring. Confidence, that invisible engine, stalls. What follows is not yet breadlines or shantytowns. Not yet, but the first tremors of doubt ripple outward. Investments once treated as symbols of intelligence and ambition become sources of humiliation. Pride curdles into silence. And in that silence, a generation begins stepping into uncertainty, though they do not yet know how long the road will be. The Great Depression does not announce itself with thunder. It begins with disbelief. With men standing outside brokerage houses staring at chalkboards. With wives folding newspapers before the children can see. With the quiet realization that something fundamental has shifted and may never fully return. And if you're drawn to stories that uncover the human heartbeat beneath history, stories of collapse, courage, and reinvention, take a moment to subscribe and like. It helps more people discover these untold dimensions of the past, where statistics give way to lived experience, because this is not yet war, but it is the beginning of a long struggle, one that will test not only America's economy, but its identity itself. And as winter approaches, the first visible signs of hardship begin to rise on the edges of the nation's great cities. Places few want to see and even fewer want to admit exist. By 1930, the visible signs of collapse have migrated from Wall Street to the margins of America's cities. Near Newark Airport in New Jersey, acres of tents and scrap wood shacks rise from open ground. They are assembled from packing crates, tar paper, discarded doors, anything that can be nailed together against the wind. At night, bonfires flicker across the field like a second, restless city. These are not drifters by choice, they are fathers. And as winter closes in, the question hangs in the smoke above them: how long can pride survive without work? They call these settlements Hoovervilles, a bitter nod to President Herbert Hoover, whom many blame for the spiraling crisis. but the name cannot capture the ache beneath it. Inside, these makeshift communities gather men who once wore pressed shirts and carried lunch pails to steady jobs. Men who once came home with wages folded neatly into their wallets. Now they huddle around open flames, trading rumors of factory openings that vanish by morning. In apartments across New York, milk disappears from breakfast tables. Taxi drivers idle at curbs for hours without a fare. Landlords knock more frequently, their patience thinning. Families learn new arithmetic, how to stretch a loaf of bread, how to make soup from bones, how to explain to children why the lights must stay off longer tonight. The depression is no longer abstract, it is domestic. And yet what the statistics will never fully capture is the emotion saturating these rooms. The depression is fraught with shame, not simply poverty, humiliation. Fathers stare at quarters placed gently on kitchen tables by wives who have pawned jewelry. Cigars, once symbols of earned comfort, are snapped in frustration because they cannot justify the expense. Across neighborhoods, a phrase begins to circulate in low voices: "He couldn't work," not wouldn't, couldn't. That single word becomes both explanation and indictment. By the fourth winter, the lines for relief stretch around blocks. Breadlines snake past storefronts that once gleamed with merchandise. Men avert their eyes from neighbors. Pride becomes a heavier burden than hunger. And beneath the humiliation lies a more dangerous fear. What happens to a nation built on self-reliance when self-reliance fails? But something unexpected begins to flicker amid the hardship. Laughter. Burlesque theaters fill even as factories empty. Stages glow under footlights, while homes darken early to save electricity. Audiences crowd into cramped seats, eager for slapstick routines and exaggerated gags. Because when reality becomes unbearable, humor becomes survival. All comedy comes out of tragedy, one voice later reflects. In those smoky theaters, punchlines land with explosive relief. For a few hours, the humiliation loosens its grip. The jokes are sharp, sometimes cruel, often self-mocking, but they give shape to shared pain. Laughter becomes a communal language of endurance. In shantytowns near Newark, men pass around stories instead of cigars. They invent nicknames for misfortune. They exaggerate their own bad luck until it becomes absurd. The humor is not denial, it is defiance. If they cannot control the economy, they can at least control how they respond to it. Yet beneath the laughter remains a tightening question. If dignity can be stripped away so quickly, how does a generation rebuild it? What does reinvention look like when you have nothing left to lose? Because while some men remain by the bonfires, others begin to look westward. Toward highways stretching into uncertainty. Toward freight trains rumbling past in the night. Toward the possibility, however faint, that somewhere beyond the smoke and shame, there might be work. And as spring approaches, America itself begins to move. In June 1929, just months before the crash would scar the nation, a young man sticks out his thumb and begins hitchhiking north toward Walla Walla, Washington. He carries little more than $5 and a restless determination. To cross the Rockies, he climbs into freight cars, learning the unspoken codes of the rails, where to hide from railroad police, how to wedge himself between cargo for warmth. He does not yet know that within weeks, the country itself will begin riding the rails with him, and that the road he has chosen will soon become America's last fragile hope. $2 a day flipping a light switch, that is one of the jobs he finds. It is monotonous, mechanical, but it pays enough to eat. In a fragile economy, even absurd work feels like salvation. Across the country, thousands make similar calculations. They drift from town to town, chasing rumors of harvest work or factory shifts. YMCA gyms fill with men sleeping shoulder to shoulder on cots, boots lined carefully beneath them like soldiers in a quiet army of the unemployed. Then October arrives. The crash does not simply erase investments. It erases momentum. Temporary work evaporates. Employers who once tolerated itinerant laborers close their doors entirely. Freight trains grow more crowded as men cling to ladders and break rods, their faces smeared with soot and uncertainty. Movement becomes both necessity and exile. By the early 1930s, another migration gathers force in the parched heartland. Crops fail, wind lifts soil into blackened skies. Though the script does not dwell on economic language, the Dust Bowl announces itself through motion, through families loading mattresses onto Model Ts, through mothers gripping steering wheels along Highway 66, navigating without maps toward rumors of California orchards. No one knows precisely what awaits them, only that staying guarantees ruin. And somewhere on a Greyhound bus headed west, a young traveler reads The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. The novel resonates because it mirrors what he sees outside the window: dusty fields, roadside camps, exhausted families inching forward on instinct alone. The book does not invent suffering, it documents it. And for readers who have lived it, the pages feel less like fiction and more like testimony. Dirty mattresses tied with rope, no roads clearly marked. A mother calculating gasoline against hunger. The depression becomes kinetic, a nation defined not by stability but by transit. America is no longer rooted, it is restless, yet within that motion, imagination stirs. When everything familiar collapses, the mind searches for new architecture. The young hitchhiker who once rode freight trains will carry those memories forward: the cold steel beneath his palms, the smell of creosote ties, the dignity preserved in small acts of sharing bread among strangers. Hardship sharpens observation, displacement breeds narrative. Across highways and rail yards, stories accumulate like dust. Men swap tales in boxcars, women exchange recipes in migrant camps. Children memorize landscapes sliding past windows. What begins as survival slowly transforms into perspective, a wider, harsher understanding of the nation's fragility. And if these stories move you, if the raw human pulse of history matters, take a moment to subscribe and like. It helps more people discover how deeply the past shapes who we become, especially in moments when everything seems uncertain. Because from these roads without maps will emerge something unexpected, not merely endurance, but reinvention. Some who rode the rails will later build new worlds in ink and imagination. Some who drove west through dust storms will transform memory into art. One boy watching highways blur past will one day look beyond Earth entirely, toward Mars. And when industry fails, culture begins its quiet rebellion. When industry collapses, culture does not retreat, it adapts. As factories fall silent and banks shutter their doors, theater marquees continue to glow. Burlesque stages flicker with light. Comedians rehearse timing as carefully as bankers once calculated interest. In cramped dressing rooms, performers powder their faces and adjust costumes, aware that for the price of a ticket, they are offering something more valuable than distraction. They are offering relief, and in a nation stripped of certainty, relief becomes revolutionary. Laughter in the 1930s is not careless. It is edged, it carries the weight of unpaid rent and empty cupboards. Yet the punchlines land with force precisely because the audience understands the stakes. When a comic exaggerates the absurdity of joblessness, the crowd roars, not because unemployment is funny, but because shared recognition dissolves isolation. For a few hours, shame loses its authority. One father who once fought in the First World War now reinvents himself as a performer. Stability is gone, identity must be rebuilt. The stage becomes a laboratory for resilience. Every joke that lands is proof that collapse has not silenced him. Performance replaces predictability, reinvention replaces routine. And somewhere, a boy who rode buses through the Dust Bowl absorbs these lessons in motion and memory. He watches highways stretch westward, he reads Steinbeck. He listens to the cadences of hardship spoken aloud. Years later, that boy will write the Martian Chronicles, a work that carries within it the structural DNA of The Grapes of Wrath, episodic journeys, displacement, families searching for belonging, not in California this time, but on Mars. His name is Ray Bradbury, from Breadlines to Planets. From freight trains to interplanetary colonies, from humiliation to imagination, Bradbury's Mars is not merely science fiction, It is migration rewritten in cosmic terms. It is Dust Bowl memory translated into red soil and alien skies. The Depression, though rooted in scarcity, produces abundance in storytelling. It teaches a generation to build worlds when the one beneath them fractures. This is the paradox of the Great Depression. It strips away illusion, but it clarifies vision. It forces children to watch adults struggle honestly. It exposes fragility. And in doing so, it plants a question deep within a generation. If the ground disappears beneath you, what will you create instead? The answer emerges not only in literature, but in temperament. Those who endured the 1930s carry forward a hardened pragmatism and a sharpened empathy. They have known hunger. They have felt humiliation. They have learned to laugh when circumstances invite despair. That psychological forging becomes foundational, because within a decade, many of these same men and women will face a global conflict unlike anything the world has seen. The Second World War is still ahead. But the resilience required to confront it, the capacity to function amid uncertainty, has already been shaped in breadlines and boxcars, in shantytowns and bus stations. The Great Depression is often measured in percentages and production graphs. But its deeper legacy lives in memory, in the father breaking a cigar in half, in the mother driving west without a map, in the boy imagining rockets rising from dust-choked fields. Collapse, shame, survival, reinvention. Out of economic ruin emerges a more mobile, creative, psychologically tempered America. A nation forced to redefine itself not through abundance, but through endurance. The war is still to come, but the forging has already begun.